Bir sonraki panelimiz sosyal inovasyon için tasarım yaklaşımını dönüştürmek, topluluğa sahiplenme kültürü kazandırmak. Yani bunu bireyleri tek başına aşacakları bir yolculuk olmaktan çıkarıp toplumların sahiplenmesi için ne yapabiliriz? Gerçekten günün son paneli olarak bence çok güzel bir panel olacak bu da. Jocelyn Wyatt konuğumuz. İnsan odaklı tasarımın öncülerinden olan, bu yolculukta pek çoğumuzdan önce yola koyulmuş olan İdeoorg'un kurucu ortağı ve CEO'su. Moderasyon için gözlerimizi Fatoş Karahasan'a çevireceğiz. İstanbul Bilgi Üniversitesi öğretim görevlisi, gazeteci ve yazar. Kendilerinden bize ilham verecek topluluk odaklı uygulamalar hakkında biraz bilgi alıyor olacağız. Evet, sevgili Fatoş, seninle birlikteyiz. Ne güzel seni görmek. Keyifli bir panel için biz hazırız. Söz sende.
Ben de hazırım ve tebrik ediyorum bütün ekibi. Sabahtan beri bütün konuşmaları izledim. A ve B arasında gidip gelirken bir kısmını kaçırdım ama hepsini izledim. Mükemmel bir öğrenci olarak çok çok ilham vericiydi. Benim kalbim sabah Koç Üniversitesi'nden konuşan Deniz'de kaldı. Dedi ki biz gençler her yerde sahneye biz çıkalım dedim. Bizim hakkımızda konuşurken bizi de işin içine alın dedi. Paydaşları alın, dahil edin dedi. O kadar güzeldi ki ve özellikle bütün ekibi kutluyorum. Çok fazla genç dinledik bugün. Onların görüşlerini gördük. Bütün paydaşlar bir aradaydı. Yani bu kadar zor bir dönemde, pandeminin ortasında bu şahane etkinliği yaptığı için bütün ekibi kutluyorum. Parçası olmaktan da çok mutluyum.
Ben de onlar adına alıyorum teşekkürlerini ve iletiyorum stüdyoda ve beraberinde olduğum ekibe. Çok çok teşekkürler Fatoş'cum atlamadığın için. Hatta bana bir şey hatırlattı bu sözlerin. Güzel bir anket formumuz var. Çok keyifli sorular var içinde. Ne güzel olur izleyiciler sizi izlerken o anketimizi de doldursa. Sesimizi duyurmak dedik. Hadi sesinizi duyurun. Anketle bize görüşlerinizi iletin sevgili izleyiciler. Ve sözü tekrar Fatoş'cum sana devrediyorum.
Bir de şunu söylüyorum. Sabahtan beri bir sürü şeyi telefon aracılığıyla paylaştım. Buradaki sesi çoğaltmak için sosyal mecrada da konuşalım. Çünkü umuda ihtiyacımız var. Olumluya ihtiyacımız var. Geçtiğimiz günlerde katıldığım bir toplantıda şöyle dediler. 20. yüzyıl yeni başlıyor 2020 ile beraber. Aslında bu da 21. yüzyılın ilk 2020 ile başlayan ilk en önemli toplantısı oldu benim açımdan. Jocelyn Wyatt'la beraber konuşuyor olmak büyük bir keyif. Biraz önce sevgili Didem şahane bir oturum yönetti. İmperatif 21 çok etkileyiciydi. Şimdi sizlerin de söylediği gibi hepinizin yakından tanıdığı bir çok kıymetli teorisyen ama aynı zamanda da pratikte de çok güçlü bir kişi. Jocelyn Wyatt'a bağlanacağız Amerika'ya. Hello Jocelyn.
Hello.
How are you? We are a bit late, but it was so full. Every person had like 1 minute extra. What happens at the end of the day? We have the last panel. So sorry about that. Make sure that we finish on time.
No problem.
So Jocelyn, as we agreed, we can start with your introduction to idea.org, with your presentation. We can have the framework and then we can move on to our chat.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here with all of you today. Wanted to share a little bit about idea.org and in particular to talk about how we shift power to communities through the design process. Next slide. So idea.org is a nonprofit design studio. We started about 10 years ago. And our mission is to design a more just and inclusive world. So we apply human-centered design to a range of social impact challenges, from health equity to women's economic empowerment, and really partner with nonprofits, community-based organizations, foundations, governments, and companies to design new, more effective ways to meet the needs of the communities that those organizations serve. We came out of the design and innovation firm IDEO, which started in Silicon Valley in California more than 40 years ago, and really realized that we needed a different approach to work with nonprofit organizations on social challenges. So we now have studios with ideo.org in New York, San Francisco, and Nairobi. Our team is about 70 people, and we work around the world and have designed solutions that have reached over 64 million people. So we apply human-centered design, which is a creative approach to problem solving that really starts with inspiration, understanding people's needs, through participatory research, interviews, observations, and we go through cycles of ideation, brainstorming, prototyping, testing, refining, and ultimately get to solutions that we implement that are tailored to meet people's needs and are able to scale to have widespread impact. So community co-design is a practice that we've been advancing, which is really focused on shifting power from the designers to the community members, the people that will ultimately own the solutions. Community co-design recognizes that the people that are closest to the problems are best equipped to solve those challenges and come up with solutions. And so what we're doing in community co-design is really bringing people in from communities to get to those solutions. And we as designers are serving more of a role as facilitators. So this is a spectrum that that's been helpful for our team to refer to, because there's different modes of design, and it's helpful to think about how we employ different modes at different times. And get IDEO, our focus has historically been around sort of a human-centric approach or perhaps a participatory approach. But what we're shifting more towards now in our work is this co-creation approach, and even into a self-determined approach. And so this has been a journey to start to really build out our methodology across this spectrum. So the principles of co-design that we employ, the first is really about trusting in community expertise. Again, this is about understanding and believing that those that are closest to the challenges have the most context and knowledge and ability to get to great sustainable solutions for them. So for instance, we worked to design a healthcare facility in Dallas, Texas. And instead of thinking that our designers were the ones that could lead the research and come up with the solutions themselves, we employed local community leaders to go out and facilitate conversations within their own communities and bring that back to us, and then worked with those community leaders to really design a community health clinic for the Dallas community. The second, if you can go back. The second principle is really about embedding equity within the process. So we recognize that we need to really work to make design accessible to everyone, not just to designers that may come at it with more privilege. So we need to really create equitable engagement. This means paying people for their time and expertise. I'll share a little bit about a program that we're running called the Billion Girls Collab, where we have a paid fellowship program for adolescent girls to design alongside of our team. And then the third is around creating environments of inclusion. So this is really about making people feel that there's a sense of belonging and feel welcome. It's really the opportunity for our team to create spaces where an adolescent girl does feel comfortable contributing creatively and sharing her voice and being as much a definer of the solution or the definer of the problem statement as anyone else. And so really developing those methodologies and the ways for people to feel more comfortable so that their voices are truly included as a critical part of the co-design process. So share a couple examples of community co-design and how that's played out in our work. So the first is the Billion Girls Collab that I was just mentioning. So here what we're doing is we're launching an incubator for girl-led solutions. We recognize that for so long in philanthropy and the social sector, solutions for adolescent girls have been defined by NGO workers or professionals, and that girls themselves have had little voice in terms of framing up the challenges or coming to the solutions. And with the Billion Girls Collab, we really wanted to change that. So we're doing that by elevating the dreams of girls, co-creating solutions, and convening partners to bring them to life. So as I shared, we have a girl fellowship where we bring adolescent girls in and really build their design capabilities. They're the ones that frame up the challenges and ultimately are the solution creators. We run design sprints where we have our team of professional designers based in Nairobi work alongside the girls and the community-based organizations to advance solutions. And then then we have a cohort of partners. These are grassroots-based, community-led organizations who are the ones that will really implement these solutions within their existing programs and communities. So with the Billion Girls Femme Fellowship, we're really putting the power in the hands of these adolescent girls to be the designers of the solutions and the framers of these challenges. The first sprint that the girls really defined was about fostering dialogue within families in order to prepare girls for the transitions and changes ahead as they went through puberty and as they started to become sexually active. These girls told us that they found that they weren't able to have conversations with family members, but then that led to a lot of sort of questions that they had in their own minds about what was happening with their bodies and what would happen as they got into relationships. So the girls led interviews with their friends and with peers. We ran them through a process of synthesis and design, where we figured out, what were the solutions that they felt like were the best to be able to address this challenge. And then they took prototypes into their community and got feedback and worked with us to refine them as well. This work ended, next slide, in two different concepts that are now being taken forward by community-based organizations. This first one is a platform that makes having the talk about sex less awkward and nerve-wracking for both parents and their teenage children. Next slide. Is a place where parents and teens can pick up items to help have them so that they can help have the talk at home. So this is sort of provides the starter kit based on who you are so that you can have this conversation with your children or with your parents. Next slide. And then developed sort of the journey of how this works and put together this platform, again, for the community-based organizations to really start to build out and offer for the communities of adolescents and their families that they're working with. The second concept that the girls designed was called Girl Time, which is really a conversational bot and monthly zine to help share information about puberty in a more joyful and accessible way. So this is really a tool that makes facts about puberty more digestible and easier to understand, gives information to girls about menstruation. Next slide. And the girls can sign up for this chatbot, ask their questions, and get information in a really sort of informal and friendly way. So the Billion Girls Collab is a really interesting model for us in that the girls, as opposed to the donors or the nonprofits defining what the challenges are that we work on, the girls that we bring together are the ones that are doing that. And instead of our designers being sort of the leads in coming up with the solutions, the adolescent girls and their peers are the ones that are really driving those solutions. So the second project that I wanted to share is work that we're doing in the United States with the Centers for Disease Control and the University of Minnesota. Work is really focused on building vaccine awareness and confidence in the US for the COVID-19 vaccine, in particular amongst refugee, immigrant, and migrant communities. So here, the traditional way that the CDC, the CDC is the United States' sort of Ministry of Health effectively. Typically, their messaging sort of starts at the government level and then is passed down through. There's one message for all. And here, the challenge was really to say, these messages from the US government aren't really resonating with refugee, immigrant, and migrant communities. And therefore, we're seeing lower rates of COVID-19 vaccine uptake. So how might we really work with community-based organizations to tailor messaging for these communities and use sort of their trusted leaders and connection points and organizations that they're close with in order to disseminate these messages? We found through our research that there's a real lack of understanding of how the vaccine works and concerns about safety and efficacy. Lack of understanding, a real concern about sort of putting yourself out there if you're not a legal immigrant into the United States, and then just an overwhelming amount of information and a sense of feeling hopeless and not knowing where to go. So we hosted community workshops with Haitian and Latinx communities in the US and asked participants to role play how they might try and convince a friend or family member to get the vaccine, and gathered feedback from from them on different campaign directions. This really helped us understand, what modes of communication were people using, what did they feel like was really effective in convincing members of their communities or people that they love to get the vaccine. So we got to some emerging principles, which were really around sort of leaning into cultural identity, allowing for customization, really connecting people with images of people that looked like them and using language that they were familiar with. So our slogan is our reason to believe. So we know that the reason may be different for each community based on their own history and their lived experience and their present day realities. And so we're able to develop this brand that had a lot of flexibility to speak to different communities. And this is a mark that the CDC has started using for vaccine confidence. And we were really working to adapt it and localize it and put it in different languages and contextualize it for different communities. And then the photography that we used, again, was really representative of the communities that the messaging was meant to serve. We were really worked with the community leaders to curate these messages and the slogans that would go on these images. So these are just some examples of some of the work that has been sort of contextualized and it's being disseminated through community leaders. Some more examples of what that looks like. And then we've developed this kit, which allows community-based organizations to really customize the COVID-19 vaccine messaging for their own communities. So this is a kit that will be disseminated by the CDC to community-based organizations around the U.S. so that they can really contextualize this for their own communities. So the community leaders are now working with us to get this messaging and the campaign out into their own organizations and their communities. And it's been just a delight to really be engaging with them in such a direct way so that they are seeing messaging that really reflects their communities and the people that they serve. We're now doing some testing in the Haitian community in the US, and this will help inform the toolkit and the campaign as well. And also testing with the Latinx community with different vaccine clinics and folks throughout the US are Spanish speakers and are part of the Latinx community to, again, continue to adapt and refine this messaging campaign. And then really working with these community leaders to create this campaign, make it their own, and disseminate the messages through their own communities. So I will close there and turn it over to the rest of the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. You have written two very important, very insightful articles. One was in 2010. The other one is very recent, 2021, in Stanford Social Innovation Review. A decade sometimes is not that long, but 1 year is like a century. With this pandemic, we are entering a new era, maybe a new century. What has changed and what hasn't changed in this period of 10 to 11 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so much has changed. 10 years ago when we first wrote the article, social impact design was very nascent. There were very few design organizations that were practicing it. Social impact design wasn't really known by nonprofit organizations. And so at that time, we were really just introducing it. We were learning different methodologies and ways of practicing it. We were taking what we had learned from the private sector and applying it to the social sector. And so 10 years later, I think we are seeing that there's a whole field of social impact design. There are designers around the world in a way that that there weren't before who are practicing social impact design. There are design organizations around the world. There are design schools that focus on teaching social impact design. Private sector design firms have started building portfolios of social impact design. We're seeing nonprofit design organizations. So I think just really, in the last 10 years, a whole movement has grown around social impact design that didn't exist at that point. And I think we've all just learned how to sort of shift some of the methodologies that we've practiced in order to reach greater impact over the last 10 years.
I have seen a great deal of flexibility and speed in everything you have done in your life also. You are not afraid of trying. I will later on come to your personal experiences. And at the beginning of your career, you said, I followed the rules. I didn't take risks. But now there are no rules and you took a lot of risks. It's flexible. It's very fast. How do you manage and how can we manage to be flexible and fast?
I think to me, a lot of what I've learned as a leader has been about how to center leadership on values. And I think when we center our leadership on values that we've spent the time to sort of reflect on and clarify for ourselves, then it feels less risky to make decisions because they come from a place that's really centered and connected with who we are. And it feels like you can act with a sense of integrity. And so for me, I served as an Acumen Fellow, and the leadership training that we got through that was really about sort of values-based leadership. And so I think that's what allows me to make decisions quickly and to follow a path with conviction is always recentering on those values.
So can you transmit this easily to your teams? Can everyone share the same values? Because we're talking about a wide range of problems. We're talking about the entire planet. Things are changing. Diversity is there. We are trying to include everyone. How can we manage to bring everyone to the same level so that they can defend the same values?
I mean, I think there's sort of different levels of values and goals, I would say. So I think for me, there's like a set of personal values that help drive the decisions that I make in my professional life and my personal life. And those are sort of held by me. I think there's a set of organizational values that IDEO.org holds that help guide us as we make decisions and prioritize and as we continue to live into the organization that we wish to be. And then I would say there's sort of global goals that we may be looking at. And so I think for me, the sustainable development goals sort of provide that kind of common place that I think we are all sort of driving towards: the private sector, governments, the social sector. And so I think the sustainable development goals, though not necessarily values, I do think that they are at least give us some outcomes that we're trying to achieve in service of social and environmental impact.
On the one hand, you have things that really require a lot of logic, a lot of science. On the other hand, we need creativity. You said we have creative approach to problem solving. Coming from a creative industry, I know that it's very difficult to have this creative talent and creative output all the time. How can you manage to have a consistent creative approach in your problem solving procedures?
So I think the way that we work facilitates that. So collaboration is critical for the way that we work at IDEO.org. We believe that people are more creative when they work together and when they collaborate. And so I think that's a piece of it, is finding structures. We believe that people have an easier time being creative when we can construct things as projects or sprints, where there's a really clear sort of brief that we're working towards and a starting point and an ending time, and that people can sort of work within that construct. And then there's things that we do that sort of enhance our creativity. So we do creative warm-ups in the morning, for instance, where, we may be, sketching something or brainstorming things or writing something funny. And then we do other things, like we share inspiration with each other and we find creativity in the world and bring it to our colleagues and share that as a way to sort of continue to advance what we see as creatively excellent. So I think there's a number of things that we do, but a lot of it is really about the way that we sort of structure our time and our teams and just continue to encourage and celebrate that creativity.
How do you screen in an atmosphere of this, joy and sharing inspiration? How do you find the way to take the best out of, or the good ones out of the entire solutions or proposals or ideas or sparks? Because, in brainstorming sessions, there is generally a lot of information, but you have to have this talent eye to find what is good and what is serving. Also, to be fast again.
Yeah, I think there's both. I think one piece of it is that what we tend to see is that in brainstorming and then sort of in concept development afterwards, that there's certain ideas that people keep coming back to. They get a lot of energy. People keep building on them. And so there's sort of something that, like, people are drawn to good ideas. And I think bad ideas or ideas that aren't really going to work just kind of like fall off. And so we just don't worry too much about them. And that's why we say, one of the rules of brainstorming is to defer judgment. engagement. It's better to keep building on the great ideas than it is to like discuss and debate the bad ideas. They'll naturally fall away. I think the other piece of it is really around prototyping. So once we get to a set of ideas that we build out, then we're really testing them. And prototyping can be quite rigorous and analytical as we really figure out which of these solutions is the right solution. So even, I shared this story about the work with the CDC that we're doing about campaigns. We'll actually post those messages on Facebook. We'll buy Facebook ads, and then we'll test click-through rates to see if campaign A or campaign B or campaign C is the most effective. And so that allows us to also be able to say, like, well, we don't necessarily know what a Haitian immigrant might find compelling in terms of a vaccine announcement, but we're through seeing what people click through on Facebook, we're able to see what does seem to be resonating with them.
So during the period when you're looking for ideas, you have apprentices, you have people with all levels of information and expertise, and then you come up with a common solution. Then starts the scientific part. You measure it kind of rigorously. That's what I gather from your explanation.
That's right. That's right.
How can you make sure that if it's not a unanimous decision, because most of the time a group has one idea and the other group has another idea, and they don't feel okay when they feel that they have lost their voice? How do you create a common ground? How do you unify all these people? Because when you have a large group, a lot of people have a lot of ideas, and everybody thinks their idea is the best.
I think a few things. One is that we have a real, I think once people sort of write a note on a Post-it or put a concept up and it goes onto the board, or the virtual board or the physical board, it's no longer their idea. It's an idea of the group. And so we don't hold individual ownership of concepts or ideas once they sort of come out of us. And so we don't refer to something as like, well, Joe's idea versus, Jocelyn's idea. We don't talk about it like that. We say like the supermarket idea versus the laundromat idea. So I think that's one piece of it, is depersonalizing it. I think another is that we vote at times. We'll sort of look at a whole set of ideas and we'll say everyone gets 3 votes, and you can vote on your own ideas or other people's ideas, but vote on your favorite. And then we sort of say like, okay, these 3 have the most votes. They're the ones that we're going to prototype and test. And then I think another piece of it, we use the phrase a lot, disagree and commit, which is, you may not like this, but this is what the team has decided, and we're going to go forward with it and keep moving along. And no more, we're not going to debate about whether we should have picked this other idea or this one. We're going to keep moving forward with this now.
I love this, because this is the key. Because after a decision is made, then you have to commit yourself, disagree and commit and be part of the group. That is the key to any kind of teamwork. What about citizens? How can we motivate them? How can we involve them? Because, this is us and them. Despite the fact that we work with them, we include them in the process of designing. But how can we kind of improve the adoption process and make it faster?
Yeah, one platform that IDEO has built out over the last decade is a platform called Open IDEO, which is an open innovation platform. And Open IDEO really puts big challenges out to a global community and asks people for input for their solutions to those challenges. So I think that's one place where we're able to get sort of input from citizens in a broader fashion. And then I would say that it's really through the sort of methodology of community co-design, where we're engaging specific communities in those solutions as a way to get that input as well.
During the conversations today and presentations, one of the words that came up often was the trust issue, because nowadays everybody needs a safe environment and they need to trust the other party. This is intangible and it's very hard to produce. What is the best way for communities and for social entrepreneurs and for anyone working in the social innovation business to create an atmosphere where people can feel safe and trust the process?
Trust takes time, and I think to try and hurry up trust building too quickly is where we sometimes get into trouble. I think for us, that's the real value in working with community leaders or community members, is that they have the trust, and then if we can earn the trust of one individual or a couple individuals, and then they have the trust of the broader community, then we can work through them and start to build that trust with the broader community. But when we don't have that liaison, I think it's really challenging as outsiders to gain the trust without someone that's sort of making that bridge and being the kind of truth tellers on both sides.
Do you feel it easier to work with communities now than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago when you were a student starting to work in social platforms? Was it easier then, or is it easy now? What has changed?
I think 10 years ago, I thought that I could go directly into a community and get honest answers from them, and that I could be the one that was sort of doing that. And I think that was naive. So in a way, I think I thought that it was easier then, but now I realize that it's harder, but I think we're doing it more effectively. So I think now I would say, like, I'm generally not the right person to be sort of like in the midst in a community. I'm more often removed from that, but I believe that we're getting more sort of honesty and more thoughtful insight and solutions from communities by not having people like me be the ones that are sort of the ones trying to like be in the midst in that community now.
What about the workforce that is working in these projects? What changes? Because we now have a new generation Z. They are afraid about many things. They are worried and they want to solve things quickly because they want to have a better world in the future. 20 years ago, we knew the problems, but it wasn't so imminent. They don't have the time and they are impatient. Do you observe this, and how do you deal with such enthusiasm and impatience?
I think we do. I also think that there is a greater sense of responsibility in terms of anti-racism, anti-colonialism, equity amongst the younger folks that work at our organization. I think that there's more recognition that we need people that come from and have lived experience to be the ones that are engaging communities. We really, the identity matters in terms of who's doing this work. And so I do think that there's impatience. I also think that people have a better understanding of what their role might be in advancing some of these changes than people of my generation, for instance.
What can we do as individuals? Everybody, the typical psychological explanation. When the problem is too big, everybody thinks someone else will solve it, and we complain about it, but we don't take action. So how can we increase the participation, engagement? I know that it's a kind of a difficult single question, but I'm sure you have a lot of insights on that.
I mean, I think there's lots of important things that we can do. I think we need to vote and select our political leaders who can represent us and make the changes in the world that we know are necessary. I think we can donate and financially support organizations that we believe are doing the work that needs to be done and support the communities. I think we can frequent local businesses that are owned by women and people of color and refugees and immigrants. I think we can volunteer our time or dedicate our professional experience or life to it. I think we can share the stories of people on the front lines who are doing the really courageous and critical work. So I think there's so much that we can do as individuals to really sort of support the work of the leaders that are doing the really critical work to change our society and our world.
Jocelyn, what made you choose this path? I have listened to your Acumen presentation. That's really lovely. As a young student studying anthropology, you wanted to solve the problems. Problems were big, and you said my solving ability was not that big, limited. But you took the action and you were courageous. You became part of it. I'm sure you felt discouraged, disappointed most of the time as a young student. How did you manage that? Let's focus a bit more on your personal experience, which is very valuable to us.
I think for me, it always felt like the most interesting and engaging work to do. I think when I looked at the sort of problems in the world. And I don't know that it was even so much of a choice for me. I think both of my parents were educators and had worked in nonprofits, and so I grew up amongst people that were sort of mission driven in terms of their career choices, and I felt the same way. And so for me, it was about finding problems that felt engaging and challenging, but also felt meaningful to solve. And so for me, that took me into the field of international development. I was really curious about the world. I mean, from a really personal standpoint, I wanted to be able to travel and experience other cultures and see different places. And so international development sort of gave me that lens, I think. And then I think once I started seeing the challenges and understanding the challenges and the real like wild disparity in the ways that people lived, I couldn't sort of unsee that and needed to stay committed to really addressing the radical inequity that I saw around the world.
You are an inspiration, and we are about to end our session. I would like to have a call to action statement from you to our listeners. What can we do? Because we are going through a very, very difficult period, and it's going to be more difficult in the years to come. Please, call to action statement from an inspirational leader like yourself would be the best way to finish our conversation today.
Thank you. Well, I would say, in addition to the ways of taking action, I would say be kind to one another and be caring and understanding and empathetic to those around you. I think we're seeing that so many folks are experiencing such violence and hatred and discrimination and inequity today, and they could really use some love and understanding. And so I'd say, that's sort of the most that we can do right now, in addition to sort of taking personal action, is to really extend our love and caring and support to those in our communities and those around us.
Let's be kind and loving and generous like yourself. Thank you very much for being with us today. We'll be looking forward to seeing your new projects and maybe taking part in one of them. Thank you very much, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much.